The street children phenomenon has been one of the more complex social issues for each of the regional governments for big cities in Indonesia. These children can be seen loitering around traffic lights, train stations, bus stops, traditional markets, and even the surroundings of luxury malls while avoiding the authorities. They didn't choose this kind of lifestyle, but unfortunate circumstances forced them to live in such a state. Uneven urban development policies between other cities resulted in the unfulfillment of the citizens' economic needs, as well as a widened social gap between the privileged and the underprivileged. There are many factors that could lead a child resorting to surviving on the streets. A factor that is too familiar, of course, is the cycle of poverty. It is not uncommon for the parents or the guardian of the child to put them to work with the reason of helping the family financially. This could be in the form of busking, begging, and selling small trinkets at traffic light stops in hopes that someone would pity them. Another factor is abuse as well as neglect from the parents or guardian. A lot of times, these children live in turbulent households and experience physical, mental, and verbal abuse. They are also neglected from their basic needs like food, proper clothing, and education. Not wanting to be at home and wanting to fulfill their needs, these children are swayed to provide for themselves. With no other option, they rely on the streets, where they can find what they need quickly and easily. Marginal, vulnerable, and exploited are usually the words associated with street children of Jakarta. Marginal due to the uncertainty of their future, the odd jobs that they do for a living, and the lack of respect that they receive. Vulnerable due to the high risk of their lifestyle that negatively impacts their physical and mental health. Exploited due to the weak bargaining position that they are at, which makes them an easy target for irresponsible social workers and, worst of all, street thugs. It is widely known that these children would fall victim to the grasp of mafias that rule a particular area. They would have to give a big portion of their earnings to these monsters, and when they would not make enough, they would be physically and sexually abused. Hi, my name is Vita, and today we are going to talk about the disgusting case of Baekuni and the street children who lost their lives. In the early morning of January 8, 2010, a citizen walking around the neighborhood of Cakung East, Jakarta, saw a suspicious person dropping off a box on the banks of the Eastern Flood Canal. Through some unknown force, the citizen was compelled to check the content of the box, and to his shock and horror, he found a dismembered body. The authorities were promptly called, and the body was then brought to Polri Sukanto Hospital, a hospital owned by the National Police Force. Through the forensics team investigation, there were clear indications that the victim suffered sexual abuse. They also analyzed how the body was mutilated to figure out the exact time that it was done. Countless investigations was also done to determine the actual location where the crime took place, as well as what led to the crime itself. After the forensic team thoroughly analyzed the victim's body, the police wasted no time in releasing the physical description of the victim. The victim was a boy, roughly 9 years old, and with an average height of 120 centimeters. His identity was still unknown, but a scar on his right arm was concluded to be one of the main identifying factors. The next day, about 7 kilometers from the initial dumping site, the police found the severed head wrapped in a black plastic bag lying amongst garbage in an absolutely contaminated river. After a thorough investigation of both dumping sites as well as an intensive mapping of the surrounding area, it was decided that the victim might have been a street child. They compared it to a similar case that was simultaneously happening in North Jakarta, where dismembered body parts of the victim were found dumped in several areas. This comparison was done to see whether the MO was similar, and they realized that multiple factors were different and was entirely a case on its own. It was then concluded that the police had to join forces with several institutions such as foster homes and safe houses to further understand the habits and the activities of the street children. On the third day of the investigation, 3 people came forward and reported that a family member of theirs had been missing for a couple of days. 2 of those people claimed to be the parent of a missing son. After showing several key identifying marks from the victim, especially the scar located in the inner side of the victim's right arm, Nur Hamida, the victim's mom, broke down, and became hysterical. The victim was known as Ardian Shah, a 9-year-old boy who busked on the hard streets of Jakarta to make a living not only for himself but also his family. His father, Indra, worked as a truck driver at an industrial site, and his mom stayed at home doing odd jobs. They have 6 children, and Ardian Shah was the 4th child. All of the 6 children worked as buskers. Initially, Ardian Shah busked with his older sister but decided to part ways and tried his own luck at busking without supervision. However, his parents didn't worry if he didn't come home a day or two, as he would make about 20,000 to 50,000 rupiah every day, equivalent to about $1 to $3, enough for him to eat and play at a PlayStation rental place. This is very common for a family who relies on the streets to make a living. Children are often left alone to fend for themselves, and the parents do nothing to prevent this, as it also lifts some of the responsibilities that they are obliged to do as parents. Some, unfortunately, even encourage their children to work. Despite the hardships that he faced every day, he was known to be a very cheerful boy. He would busk happily with a few other children around his age and became quite independent by himself. They would spend a lot of time together and pooled money to buy food and refreshing drinks during the intense heat of Jakarta. It was very common for him and the other children to busk in the Cakung area. They were taught not to play or busk too far away from their home, and if they felt that they didn't need to come home, they had to stay together and stay with someone that everyone knew. One time, while out busking, Ardian Shah's older sister, Trihandayani, saw him busking with his friends. She also hadn't come home for a couple of days as she was trying to save up money from busking around Jakarta. Of course, he saw her, and due to his curious nature, Ardian Shah asked his older sister where she was going. She told him that she was going to Pulau Gadung, an area about 9 kilometers from Cakung, to busk and try her chances. He desperately wanted to go with her, even begging her to take him there. However, out of concern, she told him to just go home as Pulau Gadung is a bit far from where he would usually busk. Obviously, Ardian Shah was disappointed. He had thought that if he went to Pulau Gadung, he would definitely make a lot more than what he was currently making. Seeing his eagerness to make his own money, Trihandayani promised him that if he gets older, she would take him to Pulau Gadung and that they can busk together. However, she reassured him again that it was the best for him to go home to their parents for the day, as he hasn't been there for quite a while. He agreed, and Trihandayani went about her ways to continue busking around Cakung before leaving to Pulau Gadung. Unbeknownst to her, Ardian Shah actually left the Cakung area to busk by himself at Pulau Gadung. And that was the last time Trihandayani heard from Ardian Shah. After several discussions with the parents, the police found out that Ardian Shah is close to a street vendor usually called Babe. Babe is a nickname or greeting for father in the Betawi language. However, his real name is Baekuni. He also worked on the streets selling cigarettes, matches, and tissues. The reason why the street children would call him Babe is because he would provide them with shelter at his small rented room and would sometimes provide them with food.
Ini kita dapat dari ibu korban. Artinya dia yakin, kemudian alamatnya baru setelah dilakukan interview terus kita memperoleh informasi dan terus kita kembangkan oleh penyidik di tempat di lapangan, di mana setelah dikembangkan ternyata kebiasaan korban adalah sering bermain di salah satu tempat di rumah seseorang yang kemudian kita ketahui sebagai tersangka. Seorang laki-laki bernama Baekuni alias Babi.
Now, on the surface, he sounds like an okay person, but it was just a way to make the children to trust him in order to get what he wants. Babe portrayed himself as a protector for street children by providing them shelter, food, clothes, and just the overall adult presence that these children lacked. However, there was a nefarious intent behind these good deeds. Baekuni is a pedophile and one of the worst kinds out there. He not only sexually abused the children, but he also took their lives. When Tri Handayani hadn't heard from Ardiansyah for a couple of days, she became quite worried. She frantically asked around the children that would busk with him. All of them also said that they hadn't seen Ardiansyah for a few days. She asked them again when was the last time they saw him. They said that they last saw him at Baekuni's house. Baekuni was born in 1961 in the city of Magelang, one of the 6 cities in central Java that is densely populated and is a fertile agricultural area. It's not a surprise that his parents were farmers, but they lived in immense poverty. During his elementary studies, he would get constantly bullied and teased as si bodoh, or the dumb one, due to his difficulty in learning, which resulted in him staying behind in the same grade for multiple times. Fed up with the bullying and teasing, he ran away from home and headed to Jakarta. Once in Jakarta, he found himself homeless. To provide for himself, he busked around, but most of his earnings went to thugs who controlled the area. For shelter, he would sleep and wander around an area called Lapangan Banteng Park, a park located in the central of Jakarta, where he would be sexually abused by a male thug. He felt violated and disgusted after the traumatizing event, but things took a dark turn. Who was once the prey became the predator. As he turned into an adult, he developed an interest in male children. He tried pushing his evil desires and decided to marry a woman and lived in an area called Kuningan. However, his marriage wasn't sunshine and rainbows, as he would neglect his wife due to his uninterest in women. When she passed away, he didn't wait long to go back to Jakarta and revert back to his old ways. However, for Baekuni's nephew named Budi, he was absolutely shocked to find out that his uncle was capable of doing such deeds. Budi lives in the home of Baekuni's parents in a small village of Bugelan in Magelang City, where Baekuni would often bring along several street children or homeless children back to his hometown with him. Some he even met along the way from Jakarta to Magelang. Budi recounted that Babe can be quite affectionate with the children. He would bathe the younger ones, brush their hair, and even buy them new clothes. For the older ones, he would let them hang out in the rice paddies and play until their hearts were content. He would also provide them with food and let them watch TV. This whole experience is surely quite the luxury for the children. Just for a couple of days, they were able to sleep with clean clothes, under a roof, fed with good food, and play with other children without worrying about getting their next pay or spare change. In the late 90s, Sambudi was one of the street children that Baekuni took home with him to Magelang. He had stayed in Magelang for quite a while. However, his parents had reported him missing. The police tracked him down and eventually found him with Baekuni. He told the police that he wanted to have many children and thought that bringing Sambudi back to his hometown wouldn't be a problem because he was homeless. But we all know what Baekuni's true intentions were, and I don't think I need to elaborate more on that. He was imprisoned for 1.5 years for child kidnapping. After reviewing with Ardiansyah's parents, the police force sent a police officer named Danang to visit his rented room. He calmly asked Baekuni whether he knew what had happened to Ardiansyah. He then outrightly answered, "Saya ini orang dagang, nggak ngerti gitu-gituan. Aya wae polisi," meaning, "I'm just a seller. I don't understand those kind of things. The police are weird sometimes." Then nonchalantly walked away from the police to start selling his items. Of course, Officer Danang stayed behind and took a good look around the surrounding of his rented room. It struck him that something was terribly off. He just couldn't shake the negative feeling that he's experiencing. Throughout his years of dealing with street thugs, thieves, and even murderers, Officer Danang knew right away that he was lying. Not long after, Baekuni was brought to the East Jakarta Metropolitan Office for an interrogation with the Assistant Police Commissioner, Officer Tahan. While interviewing him, Officer Tahan noticed that under the nail of Baekuni's right thumb contained some peculiar dirt. He then called the forensic team to take a swab sample from Baekuni's nails. At the same time, the police officer at Baekuni's rented room was conducting a search for evidence. They found several items such as a machete, a plastic fiber rope, and a t-shirt stained with blood. With all the evidence that was collected, Ardiansyah's parents were asked to provide a DNA sample to see whether it had matched with the sample collected from the evidence. The samples all matched with Ardiansyah's DNA. Faced with undeniable evidence, Baekuni relinquished more information. Ardiansyah was not his only victim. He had been doing this since 1993. He confessed that he had sexually abused and killed 14 boys ranging from 7 to 12 years old. Another factor that the police found out was that Baekuni is also a necrophilia. 3 children were killed first, then sexually assaulted. In 1993, his first victim, Adit, was 12 years old. He was found in a graveyard in Pulau Gadung, East Jakarta. 1994, Ferry was 11 years old and he was found in an industrial area in Pulau Gadung, East Jakarta. Within the same year, 1994, Dolly was found in an abandoned land in Cakung, East Jakarta. He was 11 years old. In 1995, Imran was 12 years old when he was found in a vacant land in Purworejo, Central Java. Ardi and Arif were both 11 years old when they were found around the banks of the Kuningan River in 1998. Ardi, not to be confused with Ardiansyah, was one of the Pulau Gadung street children that he brought back to his hometown. Once Baekuni and Ardi arrived in Magelang, Baekuni fed Ardi breakfast with his favorite foods, which he cooked himself, and once breakfast had been eaten, Baekuni took Ardi sightseeing to Candi Borobudur. They even climbed to the highest level of Borobudur and stayed until the late afternoon, just taking in the beauty of the area. Ardi was very happy and content. However, during the trip back to Baekuni's parents' home, Baekuni had other plans. Baekuni led Ardi to an empty field near his home, and Ardi even asked him why they were visiting the area, but Baekuni stayed silent. Once Ardi was distracted, Baekuni took a plastic rope and strangled the 11-year-old boy. After this year, Baekuni stopped his spree for some unknown reason, but the police believe that he might not have stopped at all, as they believe that there should be more victims, and this is in accordance with the intensity of his killings. In 2004, it began again. Teguh Saipuddin was 13 years old when he was found in Mangunrejo village, Magelang City. Ricky was 9 years old when he was found in 2005 at a Pulau Gadung bus terminal in East Jakarta. In April 2007, Yusuf Maulana was about 9 to 12 years old when he was found at a bus stop in Cakung, East Jakarta. In July the same year, a 12-year-old boy by the name of Adi was found at Klender Traditional Market. He was the first victim who was mutilated. And the following year, 2008, Rio, 12 years old, was found on a sidewalk near Bekasi Trade Center. He was also mutilated. Little Arif was only 7 years old on the 15th May, where people would find pieces of him placed in several areas of Pulau Gadung. His last victim was the 9-year-old Ardiansyah, who was found in 2010. These are the victims that the police were able to dig up from Baekuni. And just like I said, there might be more victims that haven't been discovered, whether they were only sexually abused and never came forward, or sexually abused then murdered. And God, please do know that I don't say that lightly. They were all street children, children who were just trying to live and survive in a world filled with irresponsible and disgusting adults. I might sound harsh, but I believe their families failed them and the society didn't even bother until it was too late. Let's give a moment of silence for the victims. Baekuni killed these boys on the reason that they refused to have sexual intercourse with him. He became enraged and felt that he deserved the disgusting act because he took care of the children. 3 of the boys were killed first and sexually violated after they passed. Ardiansyah was one of them. The rest of them were raped, then killed to cover his tracks. It is sickening to know that before Ardiansyah passed, Baekuni bathed him and fed him with Indomie instant noodles. Then, as if he deserved compensation for the quote-unquote kind act, he tried to molest him, but was promptly refused by Ardiansyah. Enraged, Baekuni then strangled him with a plastic fiber rope. He then hid Ardiansyah's lifeless body in the bathroom and left to go back selling his goods at Pulau Gadung. 3 witnesses by the name of Deki, Wira, and Arif were asked by Baekuni to look after his goods and told them that he had to go back home quickly with the reason that a relative is staying at his rented room. At 5 p.m., he arrived home and to cover his tracks, he dismembered Ardiansyah's body in the bathroom. At 3 o'clock in the morning, he dumped the box and the plastic bag. By 5:45 a.m., the box was found by a witness at the first dumping site. And by 12:30 in the afternoon, the plastic bag was found by a different witness at the second dumping site. When the police held the reenactment of Ardiansyah's murder at Baekuni's rented room, the narrow road that led to his place was packed with bystanders watching. They would constantly insult Baekuni and shout that he should be put to death for his actions, which, frankly, I don't blame them for. A total of 48 key reenactments were cross-checked from Baekuni's confession, and it truly shows the evil behind his good deeds. Baekuni's trial proved to be quite difficult. As most of the witnesses were people who lived on the streets, the prosecutors had a hard time locating them as they do not have a valid home address and a working phone number. 2 of the witnesses who were supposed to testify didn't even show up. The trial resumed on the 28th of September 2010, and prosecutor Asep Amarudin was able to find 20 witnesses to stand on trial and testify against Baekuni. However, the defense argued that these testimonies are all based on witnesses' presumptions, and there is no hard evidence which can prove that Baekuni killed those children. They asked that Baekuni be given life in prison instead. However, the judge deemed that what he had committed was horrendous and beyond evil. Baekuni was sentenced to death. With the help of the Indonesian National Commission for Child Protection, Nur Hamidah was able to retrieve her son's body from Cipto Mangunkusumo Hospital's morgue. His body was held there for about 2 weeks for forensic purposes, and finally he was laid to rest on the 19th of January 2010. The whole family as well as his friends were there to mourn the ever-curious child. Unfortunately, I couldn't find more information on the other victims. Let's hope that wherever they are, they have found eternal peace, no more of their street life, and no more hardships that they couldn't handle. Just peace. This is by far one of the most horrifying cases that I have ever covered, and it shows that attention and care towards children living on the streets are basically non-existent, especially from the local government. Unfortunately, in Indonesia, there aren't a lot of tools that are provided for them to get out of that situation. So they are constantly stuck in a loop of poverty and homelessness. A terrible thing that happened. The families have no choice sometimes but to put these children to work and just put them in a very vulnerable situation where they can be taken advantage by just disgusting, evil people out there. And it's really sad. It's really, really sad. So hopefully I didn't ruin your day, and thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you on the next one.